You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. Dimitri here, and we're just days away from the Music Tectonics Conference, October 24th to 26th in Santa Monica, and we have a very compelling three-part episode to get your head ready for the most cutting-edge topics that will be on the minds and the agenda this year. 3 topics that are critical to what's happening in music innovation right now. That's the thing about this podcast and our conference. We're agile enough to give you info that keeps you on your toes of changes coming through right now. Today, our 3 guests are going to hit on streaming fraud, the billion-dollar problem, laid out by Beatdapp's co-founder, Morgan Hayduck. Then we have a segment on the seismic evolutions in music data and data transparency that's transforming how rights holders are getting paid more of what they have coming to them. That's with Serona Elton from the Mechanical Licensing Collective. And listen through to the end of this episode when we have Daniel Rowland talk about his experiments with all the major AI generative music releases of recent days, a shortcut to make sure you understand the differences and nuances between them all. That's a packed episode meant to give you FOMO. Sorry, not sorry. Let's go straight to my interview with Morgan of Beatdapp about streaming fraud. At Music Tectonics, we focus on innovation of all stripes in the music industry, from creator tools to artificial intelligence, from the metaverse to music and gaming and fitness, but we're not a flavor of the month community. There's real and tough problems to be solved in the business of music, and innovative founders and execs that join us on the podcast and at the conference use innovation to help solve these problems. My next guest is a shining star in this realm. Morgan Hayduck is co-CEO and co-founder of Beatdapp, a fraud detection company for the music industry. Morgan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dimitri. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm excited to see you in a week at Music Tectonics. You're speaking on a panel, and we'll get into a little bit of that topic now. But let's just dive in. Why has streaming fraud become such a big topic lately?
It's a great question. It's one of my favorites because it's a tale that sort of extends beyond the music industry. You can think about big pots of money, of revenue that are accessible on the internet as, wonderful things, amazing innovation that facilitates e-commerce and trade and financial institutions to do all the things that they do. But it also becomes a vector for attack for motivated, often sophisticated and coordinated bad actors who are looking to, reap some of that reward through oftentimes, very sophisticated tactics. So music, and the emergence of streaming since 2006, but really over the last 10 years, the way that the revenue pool has accelerated, the way that the consumption of streamed audio has just exploded, has made music, I think, a new attacking ground for fraudsters. And it's really, I think, a fairly simple reason to understand why they've targeted us. You have consumer-facing platforms that always have a trade-off between security and growth, with a direct revenue sort of payment outcome tied to consuming audio time, to listening to music. And so when they look at, users and the platform dynamics themselves and the ability to recoup, their investment fairly quickly, or clean money that they're looking to move from, dirty money to clean, music offers an opportunity to do just that. It's not unique to us. And I think, while we feel it specifically in the industry and are talking more about it today, this has sort of been, we're executing a playbook that is tried, tested, and true across other verticals to increase security, increase the integrity of the product for everyone who makes money in the industry, and ultimately, hopefully, push fraudsters somewhere else.
Interesting. So how big of a problem was this? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what does it actually look like? What does streaming fraud look like?
Yeah, the problem, we estimate it between 5 and 10% of all streams. If you think of each individual percentage point of global market share in streaming is worth about $175 million, it's not hard to get to very big numbers very quickly. And the reality is, the way we view it is, at 1%, it's a problem. At 10%, it's, stop everything. It's the biggest problem we have. And we're confident that it lands somewhere in that range. We're not alone in this. Other DSPs have said publicly 5, 7, 10% themselves is what they see on their platforms. Obviously, if that's a reported number, it may actually be higher, because oftentimes that's what they're catching, not what they're entirely having happen on the platform. Industry analysts, I think JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs have also put 5 to 10% in reports that they've written. So we feel very confident, not just in our own data, and what we've analyzed, but also what the other industry has sort of triangulated, other players in the industry have triangulated to as the range. And it's a startling range.
And so what do we mean by, what does it look like? What does streaming fraud look like?
It looks like, bots or stolen accounts working in coordination to drive, for the most part, revenue to non-music actors in the industry. So what I mean by that specifically is that what we see, about 80%, maybe a little bit more of the activity we see, is not targeting what you and I think of as chart music, as popular music, as the stuff that everyone is listening to on Spotify or Apple or Amazon or any of the other platforms. It's noise, it's poor, low fidelity, ripped audio from other places. It's the things that we really aren't finding in our day-to-day consumption, but has been put onto these platforms specifically to target with streams to recoup that revenue. And so I put about 80% of what we see in that bucket. And I say bots or stolen accounts, and oftentimes stolen accounts that are run as a bot farm. But there is a difference. A bot to us is an account that's been specifically set up only for the purpose of streaming music and targeting music for fraud. Stolen accounts are probably the more pernicious and honestly effective, not to give fraudsters a roadmap, tactic, because you're able to hide your intentions among the sort of natural organic listening behavior of the owner of that account. I usually pause here because I think stolen accounts is one of these things that, we've all heard the stories. We've all heard about data breaches. Experian's had a data breach. Facebook's had a data breach. Everyone's had a data breach over the years. What I don't think the average consumer appreciates is that something like 90+% of login attempts on the login wall of most consumer-facing websites are what's called credential stuffing attacks. And that is where someone has obtained login credentials from another site's breach and is testing it on other platforms. And so every time there's a breach, it's not just the platform that was impacted.
Right.
It's the ability to go and test those credentials everywhere else. So the ability to obtain stolen accounts is easier than ever. It's basically, like my co-founder Andrew often says, it's like spinning up EC2 instances on Amazon. You just have to tell someone how much you need and for how long, and they can get you the volume.
Wow. So you could be logging into Spotify with Facebook, logging into something else with Facebook, and then some third party, not even Spotify or Facebook, could somehow have a breach, and then all of a sudden people get access to your Spotify account, for example. Exactly,
right. And look, I'm guilty of this. I probably shouldn't say it, but password hygiene is probably not on my list of accolades. And I think I probably speak for a lot of folks when we say that. And then when you're thinking about the sites that you care most about protecting those login credentials for, I would guess your streaming service password and username are not at the top of that list.
Right.
And so even if you're great about it for your bank, you're probably not resetting that password or using something truly unique and hard to crack for other platforms. And when data breaches happen, that's the hope of these fraudsters.
So how does this impact artists and labels, this whole situation with streaming fraud?
Yeah, I think it's painful for everyone, but particularly for artists, because one, they're probably the furthest removed from being able to have any impact on what's happening at a sort of platform security level. And then second, the revenue flows through to them proportionally. And so if you're moving market share by any number of points at the aggregate, you're having that flow through directly and consequentially and proportionally to all of the artists, big and small, who are making a living in the music business. And I think that's, to me, that's the sort of animating motivation for the company. It's like there are a lot of people who are not empowered to do anything about this, but are on the receiving end of bad outcomes. And we want to make sure that if you're working incredibly hard and doing all the things you have to do to break through and to have a career in music, you aren't being punished by actions not of your own, but of just the susceptibility of the industry to being defrauded.
Gotcha. All right. So that's a good context of sort of how big it is, what is it, how it's impacting the industry. What exactly is Beatdapp, and how are you fighting streaming fraud?
We are a venture-backed startup. We identified this issue some number of years ago through conversations with platforms, with labels, with artists, with lawyers, anyone and everyone who would sort of speak about it, and recognize that there was clearly a gap in the market for a third party who could come in and solve this problem, not just on a one-by-one basis, but to the benefit of everyone by working together. And I don't mean that in some sort of fluffy, we can all work together, kumbaya kind of way. I mean, literally, this is a big data problem. And the way that you get ahead of very sophisticated and clever fraudsters is by having the biggest and best data set to analyze across platforms and understand what tactics are being used and how to spot those patterns on a platform by platform basis, but informed by what's happening across all of them. And I'll just give one sort of specific example here. When you work with a smaller platform, it costs far less to analyze all of their data and look for really sort of unique edge cases. And so one of the advantages of being a company that looks across platforms of all shapes and sizes is we can test and develop models on small data sets, looking for edge cases that you probably would never look for in the massive sort of Herculean data sets of some of the bigger players, but then apply that learning to them anyway. And so there's a really natural lane in any industry impacted by fraud for trusted, neutral third parties to come in and look across, across a competitive data set, right? Like DSPs are not going to share directly with one another their most granular platform data. So you need someone to sit in the middle, be a trusted intermediary, and be able to provide that benefit back to everyone.
So who are your clients?
That is a great question that we typically do not answer on podcasts.
I'm sorry. Morgan, I don't mean who are your specific clients. I mean, who are your types of clients?
Yeah, we work with sort of 4 client types. We work with DSPs directly, we work with music labels, we work with distributors, and we work with collection societies.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So a couple different approaches probably with those as well. Yep. So have you heard of specific artists or labels that have been affected by streaming fraud?
I mean, all of them have been affected by streaming fraud. I think publicly a number of them have started speaking out about this topic, whether in the context of new economic models or in the context of things that we need to get our arms around sort of better as an industry. But yeah, I probably don't go, maybe not a day, but certainly not a week without hearing an anecdote from an artist or from a label. And some of the worst stories that I hear, the ones that sort of make me the most sad, particularly on the label side, is when someone comes in and says, I worked with a third-party marketing firm that I was casting about on Google looking for someone to help me with playlist strategy or someone to help me with artist marketing. And they promised me the world in terms of being able to drive streaming volume around the first week of a release or some new single. And so we paid them, sometimes, I think recently I heard a small label say they paid $25,000 to a firm who delivered them artificial streams that were then flagged by the DSP as fraud and resulted in their artist being demonetized on the platform. That's a horrible outcome, and it's all too common because at the beginning we talked about the sort of 80% being financial fraud. The more painful for the industry part, that's directly painful for artists and labels, is the 20% that is, I thought I was buying third-party playlist help, and I accidentally bought ClickFarm. And the gray in between those two things, is all too common. Because when you search for help me get more streams on DSP X, you will be inundated with companies that are offering you services that are definitely fronts for click frauds and farms.
I mean, is there ever a legitimate third party that can get you more streams or follows or things like that? Or is it always this sort of like bot farm stuff?
I mean, I would offer a couple of thoughts. The first is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So if you're promised explicitly X number of streams for X dollars, you are more than likely buying click farms and stolen accounts. If you are talking to, and there are so many great vendors and so many great technology companies, marketing firms, agencies in the music business and outside the music business who want to break in, who do incredible marketing strategy, will help you, try to achieve virality on UGC platforms that spin into streams. There's lots of things that you can do that are legitimate. I don't want to foreclose on the entire vertical of marketing out of fear that you're accidentally buying, fraudulent streams. But if the cost benefit is presented to you explicitly in terms of you can buy this many streams from us, you should not use that vendor.
Right. I know there's a lot of companies out there that are kind of like what we used to do at Rock, Paper, Scissors. We did PR for artists and labels and tours. Now there's kind of the PR version of that as playlists, like curators, whether they're institutional curators who are hired by the DSPs or UGC curators out there that are just making popular lo-fi chill playlists or whatever else it is. Totally. So I'm sure that stuff, that varies as well about how successful they are. But it would make sense to me that you could, there's other marketing strategies besides bot farms.
Yeah, there are lots of good ones. I do all of the other ones. Sometimes people say, what should we do? And I said, anything else.
Yeah. I mean, do artists and labels have anything they can do to help stop streaming fraud?
I mean, for us, there are certain, there are certain things that they can do, certainly from an artist educational standpoint, because this isn't typically a decision that's made at the sort of parent, sort of macro level. It's made within an artist's camp or through management. And so it's just about sort of educating them that these things are out there and they shouldn't step on the rakes that are laying around that might get them in trouble. And then I think also it's worth always just pushing for more accurate detection across the platforms. I mean, if I could ask anything of the artist community and the label community generally, it would be to say, hey, like, enough is enough. There's a proven roadmap here. It's worked in e-commerce. It's worked in financial industries. I mean, we have a great Canadian company called Verifin that we often analogize to because they built this exact business in the financial services industry. They started with credit unions and small banks in Canada, and they worked their way up to being a vendor to JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, where they're looking at their data for fraud in bank transaction data. And for the exact same reason, JP Morgan and Wells aren't sharing with one another, but they will work with a trusted third party. So, advocating for, better technology, the application of that technology, that to me is probably the biggest ask I would have of the artist and label community, because the benefits really flow through, ultimately in the end to them.
Because a larger share of the money is going to real artists and labels rather than box fans and white noise. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Honestly, like whale sounds, you've had a good run. But let's.
We love whale sounds.
We love whale sounds. I don't want to pick on whale sounds. I should actually say there's lots of white noise and sleep aids and all of these other things that are legitimate. And it's funny because the patterns are clear in the data, right? You can tell when something is a sleep aid versus when something is being played nonstop, 24/7, 31-second tracks by a cohort of users that is, small and very purposeful in what they listen to.
Yeah, at the Music Tectonics pre-conference, Mark Mulligan from Media Research said, everyone, every 6 to 12 months, everyone's up in arms that, Spotify's getting delivered 60,000 tracks a day. No, wait, that's 100,000. Wait, that's 120,000. He said it's going to be 1 million very soon. Yeah. And it's interesting to think about like what percentage of those are such lightly created tracks that maybe aren't going to get a lot of listens, or maybe, that sort of points to why there needs to be a technical or a technological solution for sort of at least just vetting like what's legitimate out there. And then in a way it's hard. In some ways, it's probably harder to editorialize what is a legitimate track as genres become more diverse, and ASMR tracks could be up there. Podcasts, everyone's got a podcast. There's so many different possibilities that could go through. The DSPs were thought of as retailers, but they are UGC in another sense. We're really in this weird in between zone, and now musical creators are more UGC than studio production in some categories. So it does make a lot of sense to have some technical solution, but it's hard to vet on the front end. It's probably easier to vet the way you guys are in the sense of looking at weird streaming activity.
I think that's exactly right. The democratization of access for creators that streaming has created for them, provided them, is one of the biggest positives, and I think one of the most positive developments of the music industry over the last decade plus, right? The discovering, sort of bedroom pop stars, the Billie Eilishes and others of the world is awesome. And I don't think as an industry, we want to put gates up at the entrance out of fear. Because ultimately what will come as a consequence of that is a loss of some of the most creative, most talented people that we could be exposed to. And that would be a shame. So I agree. Technical barriers to entry, to access, are really challenging and also subjective. And I don't think, one thing technology doesn't do well is adjudicate the subjective preferences of people. So our approach, which is to look at the data after consumption fast enough that obviously illegitimate activity won't flow through to a sales report, is really the right way of looking at this. Because once you have even a couple of days, a day, a week worth of data on a particular user, a track, an artist, you can make a lot of highly confident predictions about the legitimacy of the consumption around that track or the behavior of that user. And so our view is that within a day, within a couple of days, we can start making high confidence determinations that will inform things for our clients, like should this be on an algorithmically distributed playlist or not? Should this be eligible for charting or not? And then by the time the month is done, with the highest possible confidence, we can say, exclude this from sales reports, it's fraud, keep this in, it's legit. And that, I think, is the best outcome, both for creators on the front end to make sure that they're not penalized for uploading something new that we've never heard before that's going to be great, but also protects the integrity of the industry on the back end before the money starts flowing through the pipes.
Right. Yeah. Wow. You've really hit upon a really kind of a win-win solution for the music industry. Win for you guys, but also for so many other players in the mix. Maybe not the fraudsters. So Morgan, your co-founder and co-CEO, Andrew Beatty, there at Beatdapp, is going to be on a panel at Music Tectonics called The X Billion Dollar Problem, Emerging Solutions to the Music Industry's Streaming Fraud Conundrum. We've also just confirmed Michael Pelczynski, who was VP of Strategy at SoundCloud during the moment when they did all that interesting artist-centric payout stuff. Our chief strategy officer at Rock, Paper, Scissors, Tristra New Yeager, will be moderating the panel with you. We're finishing out that panel, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are you hoping to get out of the Music Tectonics conference next week?
I mean, first of all, I live in Toronto, so any excuse to come back to LA, I will take. And Music Tectonics is one of the best ones. It's this, right? We have a message to share with the industry. We have a lot of folks that we would love to work with, to be advocating for, the solutions we're developing. You bring together a stunning room of awesome people who are influential in the industry. And so the opportunity to be there, to talk to them, to hear what's concerning them, and hopefully do some business and also just build some advocates is a win-win for us. And like I said, I wouldn't miss a reason to come to Santa Monica.
Amazing. Great. Morgan Hayduck, co-CEO and co-founder of Beatdapp. Great having you on the podcast. What's the best way to find out more about Beatdapp and get in touch?
Morgan at beatdapp.com, or you can come in off our website, but feel free to drop me a line directly. Always happy to hear from folks who are listening to the pod, and hope to chat again soon.
Awesome. We'll see you on the beach. Thanks so much, Morgan.
Thanks, Dimitri.
That was a masterclass in streaming fraud, but I'm looking forward to learning even more when Morgan's co-founder, Andrew Beatty, joins the Music Tectonics panel next week called The Billion Dollar Problem, along with Boomy's Adam Rabinovitz, music tech strategist Mike Pelczynski, formerly with SoundCloud, and our own Tristra New Yeager. Okay, time to switch gears. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Tristra has a very compelling conversation with the MLC's Serona Elton with an update on how the industry is leaning into the importance of getting rights data right and the role of transparency and getting royalties to the right people. We'll be right back. You can still get in on the conversations like these at the Music Tectonics conference. We extended our regular price tickets until noon Pacific time on Friday, October 20th. Right now, tickets are still $350 for 3 days of mind melding and mingling with music innovators. But after October 20th, you'd have to pay the walk-up rate, $450. So get over to musictectonics.com and grab your ticket. That's also where you can find out all the who, what, where for the conference, October 24th to 26th in Santa Monica, California. Don't miss out. Okay, we are back, and now Tristra has that interview with the MLC's brilliant head of educational partnerships, Serona Elton. I got unusually excited about data after listening to their conversation. Over to you, Tristra.
I am talking right now with Serona Elton, who is head of educational partnerships at the MLC. Thank you so much, Serona, for making the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you have a lot of expertise in a lot of aspects of the music business, but I really wanted to talk a little bit today about one area of your wide-ranging expertise, which is data and how the role it plays in the music industry. So we're at a really interesting time when it comes to data. It feels like some things have gotten way better, some things are remaining challenges or maybe have gotten even more challenging. What's your take on it? How would you sum up where we are right now?
Oh, how can I sum it up? Well, data is more important than ever before because, the volume of transactions that we are dealing with really in society as a whole, but especially in the music industry, the volume of transactions has just exploded. Mm-hmm. And, you just don't stand a chance of getting those transactions, which in this context, I'm talking about royalty transactions, money flowing, it doesn't flow correctly without the correct data. Mm-hmm. And so the role of data is more important than ever, both in terms of making sure that the right people get paid and making sure that people can discover and find what they're searching for. We don't think of it as data when we go onto our favorite digital music service and look for, the latest track by our favorite artist. But as soon as